Alright guys, it's good to be back on our video series on QuickBook Accounting Desktop. Last time we looked at setting up preferences and we completed parts A, B, and C. Now we are going into our own page to navigate from the beginning to the end in subsequent tutorials. So we are starting with the first in our home page, that is vendor, how to create vendors. Please guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow up on our YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up, and follow up on subsequent videos as they will be coming up. So how do we create vendors in QuickBook Accounting Desktop? We have vendor, we click on it, as simple as that. It opens the vendor's environment. Let's get familiar with the environment. If we look at the top, we have new vendor where we get to create vendor or add multiple vendors depending. And then we have a new transaction as it relates to a particular vendor. We get to enter bill, pay bill, purchase order, receive item, enter bills from vendor. We get to print vendors list, vendors information, vendors transaction list. We get to extract information in Excel, in Word, and we get to track our bill tracker. So this tells us the point in time our bill is. Have we raised the bill? Where is it at the point in time? This is where we track it. Now on the left side here, I have my vendor. These are the list of my vendors. These are the balancing total as it relates to that particular vendor's transaction. Now beside vendor, we have transactions. We have purchase order, items, bill. As it relates to that particular vendor, we have it here. Now let's go back to vendor. Now once we click on a particular vendor, if you observe by the left, you see vendors information. The information of that vendor will be displayed: full name, vendor type, account detail, billed from, billed to, phone number. And then below the vendor's detail, we have the transaction details. So all the transactions we have done with that particular vendor, everything will be displayed here so that we can see as it relates to that particular vendor. Now if we come back, beside vendor we have transactions. So this gives us transactions that has been created, such as purchase order, item, bills. And then by the left we get to see the vendor, the type of the transactions that was done. Is it a purchase order, a bill, a check, and the like of it? The number, the date, the due date for payment to the vendor. Of course, always remember that vendors are our account payables. So they are aging, the amount of the transaction due to be paid to the vendor, opening balance if there is. So let's go back to our vendor. So that is the environment of our vendor. So how do we create a vendor? So to create a vendor, we go on new vendor and then we click on new vendor. So here we have it. So vendor's name, we enter the name of the vendor. For example and for practice, let's have information. Let's have info service. Let's have info service as our vendor's name. Now if we have an opening balance with the vendor, we put it here. Now the date we start transaction with the vendor, the day the vendor comes into our system. So let's take it as January 15. Let's go to 2023 as the day the vendor comes into our system. Then we can enter other details like company name. Company name can be the same as the vendor's name. Now the contact person from the vendor, let's have Frank, and Frank's last name is Spelling. Frank Spelling. His job title, let's have a supervisor. Then phone number, main phone, let's have a 23408, blah, 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 blah. Just an example of a phone number. Now work phone, we put it, mobile phone, fax if there is, main email, let's go with Frank at infoservice.com as an example. Of course, CC email, we put it, website www.infoservice.com. So that takes care of the build from address. If the build from is the same thing as shipped from address, we put it. If the shipped from address is different from the build, we type the different address. So that is the address info. Then the payment setting as it relates to that vendor, the vendor's account number there. Example, the credit limit, let's say $10,000 is our credit limit for that vendor. The payment term, we want to pay the vendor due on receipt. That means we are paying the vendor immediately he has completed his service. If we are paying the vendor 15 days after delivery of service, we go with net 50. We are paying them 30 days after delivery of 30, we go with net 30. Let me go with net 50. So we pay our vendors 15 days after he has delivered on this service. Now the billing rate level, if we are using that in our organization, we put it. Now print name, that is the name that we printed on our check, info service. Now tax setting, our vendor's tax ID, we put it there. If let's say vendor's tax identification number, like that, just as an example, of course. Then account setting is invalid. All right, leave that. Now account setting, we can come and set up our account as it relates to the vendor here, and we can provide additional information like vendor's type. Okay, let's say the vendor serves us as a consultant. If the vendor supplies equipment, material, renders professional services. Depending on the classification of the vendor, we select the class that the vendor belongs to. Now, if we have discounts for the vendor, that is, if the vendor gives us discount for paying on time or for paying at a particular period, we put our discount there. And then our website URL, we put it here. So let's say we have a 2% discount if we pay before the due date. So we have it there. So that takes care of the information of our vendor. So we click on OK. So this is our new vendor info service. So we have the detail of our vendor. Transaction is blank because we have not done any transaction with the vendor yet. If we look down, we have manage transaction. Here we can actually manage the transactions we are doing with the vendor at that particular time or subsequent time. And then we can run reports as it relates to our transactions with the vendor. So guys, that is how we create a vendor using QuickBooks accounting.